Hello, everyone, and welcome to another horrific review. Well, thought I'd do something a bit different. It's been a while since I've done a book review, so it makes sense that we do Stephen's book. His latest one out, The Mist in the Mountain. For those of you who don't know, obviously, Stephen's one of the regular contributors. He's with me usually every other Monday as we go down the path of classic horror and just reminisce over better storytelling and cheesy effects and all the fun stuff that goes with it. But yeah, if you're not familiar, obviously links are in the description. But Steve is a crime thriller sort of horror writer. He's more into the sort of thriller aspect, but he does little quite decent albums of horror, and I've enjoyed quite a few of his books over the time. And yeah, this one's no different. It's really fun read. So premise of the story is 1982, in the Garw Valley in Wales, I think it's South Wales, yep. Spate of murders, all we screw bag kids that are messing up the place. This is very I suppose topical, showing the sort of change of rural Britain and the UK in particular. There was a phenomenon in the 60s where the government thought it'd be a good idea to basically put all the problem children, all the troubled families in the inner cities, and put them out into villages, create council estates. What happened then was they thought, oh, the good influence of the villagers, will tame them and, the good influence. But, like anything, rotten apple, you get a rotten apple, it ruins a cart. So what you've seen over from the 60s onwards, and definitely really took hold, is what we call the chav. And they're just horrible wee scummy kids. They're not raised, they're dragged up, and they just make life misery for everyone. And they're worse in the villages that they were sent out to because they basically created these mini ghettos. No employment prospects, they've nothing to do, no purpose, and kids being kids, they're bored, they get up to mischief, but then if their parents were already problem people, they're not going to be a stealing influence. So the whole idea was a nonsense, and all it did was spread a problem rather than try and solve it, which is one reason I don't get into politics, because politicians, they like nice words, they like to look virtuous, but all they do is they keep kicking the can down the road. They never actually address anything. It's the same as political commentators. They're no interest in actually solving problems because problems are complicated. People are complicated. Social issues are complicated. You have to get right down to the weeds. And people think of it, oh, just put a veneer over the top, just say a few nice words, throw a bit of money at it, and it'll just magically get fixed. And it never does. And we've now got, like, look at today's society, it's absolutely crap. It's miserable. I'm lucky enough. I can remember a time when it was better. It must be crap being young now, but like I said, a lot of these, and you knew it, all these small towns just became little hellholes, and these wee gangs ran about as screwbags and ruined the place. But this is relevant because at the end of the day, 1982 in this story, somebody decided to take matters in their own hands and starting you off them. And of course, their names were known. They were, they weren't nice kids. They weren't people that you would, feel sorry for. Because at the end of the day, they were feral and they were just causing mayhem. But what it does, it doesn't spend too long. It's only about a chapter on like 1982, that time. And he does quite well. It's only a few pages, but Steve does a great job of setting the scene. And one thing he does is shows the danger of the mob. Like, you look at today, you look at like it's done online, but it spills into the real world as well. Once the mob gets energized, there's always an agitator. There's always that one person that gets the mob up, gets them going, and has them banned for blood, and then sends them in targets. In this story, it's Billy Evans. He's the main antagonist in this book. We're not talking about movies today, Colin. We're talking about books. You had to pay it. You had to actually concentrate and read and spend quite a few hours reading this. Another thing is, you can get this done in like a few days. You know, what I mean, it's not a massive. You know, what I mean, it's a decent sized book, but uh, it's engaging story, so you can just get stuck into it and a few hours time get it done. You know, over a long weekend or something, you can easily finish this and enjoy it. But yeah, Billy Evans, he's the one that stirs up the mob. He wants a target, and they decide to target this fellow called Christopher Fallon because he was new to the village. You know, there's a local village for local people, and of course, what do the mob always do? The person that looks a bit different, acts a bit different, doesn't say their words in the right way, you know, doesn't have that conviction of whatever it is being said. And we've seen it through religion, politics, social commentary, you know, we've seen it through trends, fashions, fandom, you know, music's actually the worst one for it. Music fandoms, you know, you have to look and talk a certain way to go to the gig to fit in. If not, then you're not part of that crowd and you're instantly ostracized. You know, it's the human species at its basest. And I think getting on in this world, if you appreciate that and just sort of try and learn to navigate it, you can sort of bypass it. But unfortunately, like today, you can't, because if you just say I'm not interested, then you're instantly taken aside. You know, it's got that such a fervor, and we see it here. It's literally manifested physically with burning torches and pitchforks. I think he did write a couple of pitchforks into it just for flavor. And yeah, it turns out Christopher Fallon was actually a reporter, and he was coming to cover the pit closures. Uh, that was a massive thing in the 80s and created a lot of anger and angst, and still being felt today, especially when it never made sense. Like I said, I don't want to get into the political side of it, and you can't talk to people about it and try and get down to why it happened. But we're now shipping in stuff from overseas when we've got it here, and even talking about the environment. I mean, it costs more environmentally and carbon based stuff to ship something halfway across the world a year than to actually just extract it from where we are. You know, it's weird. I don't understand. Like I said, I was a kid back then. They're really good at that, and honestly, getting into political stuff just gives me a headache because you can't get a nuanced idea because someone is always pushing an agenda. Someone's always pushing it, right? It's always this person's fault, so you can't really, and it's infested everything now. It's I say it's a dumb yankification of Britain because we have actually went down to that base level of conversation where it's your side and our side, and we've kind of taken that stupidity over here and embraced it, and it's maddening. But yeah, pits were closed. What we're having were mining towns, mining communities, just essentially, you know, left with nothing because that was the main source of income, and also community. And it's deeper than just losing a job. When I lived in Scotland, I got to know a lot of miners, and there's a lot of them working in kitchens and stuff. You know, like in their 60s, still working, washing pots and pans. Absolutely no business doing it, but there's this sort of work ethic with miners, and despite the health conditions and all that miners might have suffered, I've yet to meet one that didn't love what they did. Like there was something about going down, you know, hundreds of feet underground, you know, even with back in the day with a pickaxe, even before machinery came in, and extract. You know, I mean, there was a sense of community. There was a sense of doing something. There was a sense of worth, and when you have that taken away, if you've got that sort of ounce about you and that gets taken away, it hurts more than just the monetary value. And essentially, a lot of towns got killed. You know, figuratively, just people then moved away and they just faltered, and there's no lifeblood. And yeah, it's kind of sad. I was, like I said, I was always interested in what the decisions were, the reasons why, but I didn't want to look into it because it's just don't need the headache. It's the same as this country was built on the Industrial Revolution. When you think of even the way the terrace streets, everything was linked to a factory. Our central heating came from the uh, Revolution, where the factory would use its waste hot water, and process like steelworks and that, and pipe it through the houses. So that was a benefit of live, you know, what I mean, the factory being up in the streets being attached. And I think it was the same in the coal mines, like the effluent, you know, the wastewater, hot, you need to do something with it. So why not heat houses? You know, there's loads of ingenuity in that time. And then to have that all closed down and just, you know, these towns. So you can understand where these kids sort of brought up, not just the idiots in the 60s that thought, oh, move all screw bags out, but actually when you've no purpose in life, you're just gonna be angry and resentful and want to lash out, and then you get these horrible wee kids, but then pendulum all swings, so they take over, make people's life, and then somebody decides enough's enough. So that's what happens in this sort of beginning of this book. They're, you know, essentially teenagers, or they're getting killed. Billy Evans, he whips up the mob, but instead of getting the actual person, they go after because there's two Fallon's, Christopher Fallon, to go after him, who then turns out to a reporter. So it's like, whoops, right, never speak to us again. Then the book timed, like, this is only the first chapter, but there's Steve's writing as well is really cool because you actually get this whole nuance. And I don't know whether you need to be British to understand that time and what happened to get the subtext. But I think anyone that understands a small town that may be required in an industry, so see in other parts of the world, you know, places that have car factories or steelworks or manufacturing. Back where I'm from, Belfast was linen. You know, linen was the like chief export of the world, and once the linen industry died, you know, that led to a lot of resentment and loss, and the shipbuilding never really, you know, kind of dwindled. That was a massive thing as well. So once that becomes the lifeblood of the community, and once it goes, yeah, people just end up feeling lost. So this jumps forward 40 years. So what, 2022, and like most of the books set during this time, we get introduced to modern day scrub bags. You know, so some things never changed. There were the problem kids then, still now, and some are just irredeemable. You know, you can't do anything for them. You can't teach them. You can't nurture them. It's just too late. I think you've got, what was it? A psychologist said you've got until a kid's 5 years old to get it socialized. Like that's a really short window of time, 5 years. And what it was, you have to get it, you know, child, you have to get it that people like the child that can interact with other kids and adults, that the adults aren't going, oh, here's we screw bag coming to call, you know, throw temper tantrums and throw fits and fight with the other kids. You've only got that short window, and if you don't have it, then you're kind of screwed. So weird. I don't claim to be an expert. I just, you know, passing interest in a lot of things in life. You can't be a reader. You can't be a commentator on things if you don't take an interest. If that makes sense. But just very interesting that. But yeah, you get these kids and they're holy terrors. So start off with three wee screw bags and they're basically going out to set fire to things. That's their kind of jam. And then the murder start up again. Now, what I will say is this isn't a murder mystery. It's a straight up slasher because you find out who the killer is, like chapter 2. Like that early in the book, you're told who the killer is. There's a bit of a subtle hint drop that it might be supernatural, but it's not. It's a, you know, I mean, this is a straight up slasher. It's the person doing their own volition. There's sort of gets visited first, but never goes back to this. So it's not that. So I wouldn't want people to think that it's a supernatural story and then be disappointed because I'll take away from the actual story itself, which is a good story. It's actually a gripping thriller. So I have this killer. They're clad in black and they use an old mining pickaxe, and it turns out it's the same pickaxe from the original killer. Now, don't forget, it's a 40-year gap, so obviously the original killer's no longer about. And it starts up the spate, you know, media interest because obviously teenagers, there's three at once, you know, and not in a nice. I mean, they're gored. eviscerated, all sort of gnarly stuff, and they're busy hung up for display. Exactly the same way as the original murders in 1982. But the funny thing is, as the media descends and that nobody's making the connection, it's not until later on, as these things continue, that people start making the connection between 1982. Now, obviously, there's a whole subplot as well, because we effectively had a mob kill someone, and then Billy Evans is the one that has everyone terrified, the older community, into silence, not to speak to the police, not to give anything away. And then we meet Tony Fallon, who's Christopher's grandson, who works for the newspaper, and he's coming down to do the story. Now, what he's doing as well, he wants to investigate what happened to his grandfather, because they never, DNA evidence wasn't out then, and if you basically mangled up a body beyond, apart from dental or fingerprints, so if you burn a body and you smash his teeth in, that you couldn't identify a body. Back then, you didn't have the technology, and even when it did first come in, it wasn't admissible in court. So it took years to get this sort of level of technology. So there's a lot of questions. The body was never formally identified. Tony never knew what happened to his grandfather. Now, I was interested in making it his grandfather, but it makes sense because of the time jump, being his father wouldn't have worked. But also, it makes it less of a cliche. If that makes sense, you've got a grandson generally interested in what happened, but it's not a revenge story. Where I think if it had made his father, it would have been too much like Sins of the Father, that he'd already written, and Steve takes it a new route and just freshens it up a bit. And that's what I mean. You can have the tropes of a standard story. Someone's done wrong, an ancestor comes to right that wrong. But by making it the grandson, making it he's an investigative reporter, he's trying to, he's following his grandfather's footsteps. They didn't really talk much about the father in this. I don't know what his story was. Maybe I've just forgotten because I'm old and I forget things. But it was more in the grandson, and just wanting to find out what happened. So he comes under, he arrives in the village. The papers actually bought a house. They have a property there. And he goes under a pseudonym to basically be undercover in the village. Of course, Tony arrives, and the first person he really encounters is Billy Evans. He goes in the shop. Oh, this is a local shop for local people, sort of thing. You're like, freaking get a life. I can understand, villagers not wanting their way of life diluted, but also don't like that sort of closed-minded designer. It's a strange one. I'm of the mind, if you're minding your own business and you're not doing anybody any harm, leave them alone. And I don't like mobs, and I don't like conformity of any sort. I don't like that. You must say these things. You must do these things. You must have grown up here and done this for 20 years. Where I'm from is a small place like that, and it's a lot of that mindset, and it's disgusting. And you just feel revulsion for folks. But this is the character, and Steve actually sets out, I think that's what I found very gripping about it. He sets the scene very well of a small village that's really, because of the secret and what they did and what Billy's imparted, it brings us almost xenophobia of anyone outside the village. And they're afraid to, they'll be polite and nice, but they'll not go any further. And it's an interesting scenario to be in. But of course, Tony arrives, and then these three murders, everything's, going crazy. It's the police, they're village police officers. Obviously, they've got the nearest town, but it's not the place. It's not an inner city police force. They're not really built for this sort of thing, if that makes sense. So they're kind of struggling with resources. And then this is a fast-paced book, by the way. The murders come thick and fast. Like, it's absolutely relentless. Like, I think you barely get like 3-4 days before the killer strikes again, which, as I say, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but the way they've done it in this makes sense because once again we'll find out about the kids that are being targeted, and it makes absolute sense. The parents don't know if they're coming home or not. They don't care. One of the wee girls that's sleeping around the place, she's only like 14. She'll stay in any bed for the night. The town bike, and her parents don't give a shit. She comes in the morning off her head and something. You know, that's so be it. And that's it. Now, it's not all the parents. I mean, there's some that care, and then you get that too. And there's one kid in particular decides he's not going to go and defile the graveyard with his mates. He decides to come home, and he survives. So it's even falling into the slasher tropes of, you don't do the things, then you're okay. Like I said, we know who the killer is, so you don't have that mystery. So what you're trying to do is, okay, how did they trip up? Where's going to be the moment of them slipping up and making the mistake? And as the police, like the main DCI go in, the main protagonist, the police inspector, trying to basically keep a lid on this as more and more happens, and they're starting to discover how the killer's getting away with it, but they can't pin it down. And then we have the link between Billy, because he instantly doesn't like Tony's character, suspicious, and partly his guilt as well. And we've got that sort of side plot going on. So Tony's doing his investigating. He's trying to find out how the two are linked and what happened to his grandfather. Billy's got a group of basically 6 conspirators. He's a gang. They're all in their 60s as well, but this sort of shows well there's nothing more dangerous than sort of an old fighter. Someone who's been doing that sort of stuff all their life, even though they're like older and slower, they're still going to be more dangerous than some 20-year-old full of piss and vinegar. It doesn't have that experience behind them. So they're dangerous people at the end of the day, and they've no compunction whatsoever of taking someone out of the picture. And that sort of plot goes on as well. Quite cool, actually. Like the way it plays out too. There's a wee bit of cat and mouse. It isn't sort of cliche in your face of, yeah, I'm gonna get you. I know you did this. Those sort of hyperbolic statements. There's none of that kind of stuff. It's all done subtly, and it's like a game of chess. People are moving about the place, uncovering pieces while other people are trying to cover up pieces. And there's one in particular where the killer breaks their pattern because there's a witness, and that's the same with the dogs. Where if you've heard Steve talking, like that's another thing I suppose you mentioned this. Steve actually went. These are all the characters in this are volunteers from the local community. Basically, okay, who wants to get murdered? He basically put out in this local thing, who wants to get murdered in my book? And then people like, me. And one of them's like, yeah, you can murder me, but don't murder my dogs. And then that, I remember that's when I read the scene and how it happened. I'm like, yes, of course, that's why it didn't happen. Which, it's funny because when you know the story in real life about it, it sort of makes you smile of the conversation that went on to actually go into the creation. It's easy subtle things that bring you deeper into the story. You can lose yourself in the story on a surface level, but when you sort of know the characters in the background, how the story came about, that just gives an added layer. Obviously, as you know, I'm trying not to spoil this, so I don't want to give away plot details. But yeah, Steve does this quite well. This could have been just a cliche slasher, like just making the police look completely incompetent, and the kills being too quick and too fast, and that. But he doesn't. He actually manages to straddle that line. He keeps the pace going. and he explains how the killers, because of the sort of people he's targeting, he explains how he's able to get away with it. Also, by knowing who the killer is, you find out how they can get away with it too. But then, as always, the net tightens. You can only do so much for so long, especially in a small area, before things start to fall into place. Then we start to find out, like the witness spoke to somebody before they got killed. So then somebody's like, oh, they said this, part of the investigating process. That's one thing. In all Steve's books, he really does go into detail. Like, I can imagine being in the ops room of CID, even though I know nothing about police procedurals, but I can imagine myself being in the ops room of CID and seeing how they go about their daily business and how they like piece together the puzzles. That it's not cliche, just investigating. And the way he tells us stuff makes it interesting. Crime thrillers are not something I normally read a lot of. It's now and again. It's Steve writing that actually makes me delve into this. But yeah, you get that sort of sense, and it's not Americanized either. There are no shootouts in the street, that sort of thing. It's proper, police work, closing the net. Then you start to see the desperation of the killer as they realize they're starting to get, the noose is tightening around him. Then we find out the link to 1982 and how Christopher Fallon ended up getting targeted and how the killer got away with it, and I'll not say any more about that because that's a massive spoiler, but that happens. And it ties up, when we get this tying up, because also don't forget, we've got the side plot as well of Tony Fallon trying to basically get justice for his grandfather. And then this secret, this pressure cooker of this secret that the village has held for 40 years, finally, the lid raised, the pressure's built up and the lid finally pops. So we get this culmination at the end of it all sort of coming together. And yeah, it's not neatly. One thing Steve does as well, he doesn't neatly tie up each book because he's always thinking of a sequel. So things don't get wrapped up entirely. There's an opening for another book, and I know he's already. I don't know whether he's made it public or not, but he's told me his own ideas. I'll not divulge for spoiler purposes. But yeah, there's a gap. It happens. There's a setup then for the next one. Things are resolved though that even if there's another sequel made, there's enough resolved here that you don't need a sequel to finish it up. You kind of know events will play out. And that can all happen off book, off screen, so to speak. You can kind of know what's happening. But yeah, if it goes into a sequel, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. Because it's one thing I'll say about this, because of the location, this is a hard story to do. Think of was it Midsummer Murders? Everything happens in the village, you know what I mean? It's like there's a murder in every other house. It could fall into that sort of, ridiculousness. But like I said, this story doesn't. But that's one tightrope he did very well, is actually managed to create a drama in a contained space, because the physical location of the valley doesn't leave you much wiggle room, if that makes sense. But yet there's enough there that the mystery can happen. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, all in all, I really enjoyed the book. It's a lot of fun. Glad I got it. It's a good story. And like I said, even if you don't normally, this is where I say I'm not tied always, to particular genres. But think of this as a slasher. This is a slasher in written form. It's a good one with a police procedural thrown in, but it's not your crime stuff. It's not your typical crime. Have you seen The Fallen? If anyone's seen The Fallen, with Jamie Dornan and what's her face, Jennifer Anderson. Is it Anderson? Yeah, it is. X-Files girl. Yeah, it's similar to that. That's small place. You wouldn't think someone would get away with what they do, but they can, and it sort of shows the cunningness of their antagonist. But there you go. Well worth checking out. Good book to read. Obviously, Steve's a great friend, and he's a regular uh, contributor to the podcast. I was looking for the word there. Flip's sake, my brain is not in it tonight. But we always have a laugh when we're on, and it's good. We've got our wee theme now. We're going through the Hammer Horror series of films, so absolute classics. And we're going right back, we're starting in the 1950s. So it's going to be interesting to see that sort of journey, to the 70s are obviously the main ones that we remember from the Hammer Horrors, but it's good to see these ones that maybe people aren't too familiar with. Real classics. But yeah, always good. There's links in the description, obviously, for the book. So if you want to pick it up and check him out on his website, I believe I put that on as well. And just even to say, keep up to date with the channel, do the type of clicky things. Until next time, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.